If someone were to tell you that we as Christians celebrate communion for similar reasons that we also celebrate Dr. Martin Luther King's birthday, you'd probably say that person was crazy. But I'm going to try to take a few minutes and tell you otherwise. To do this, I'm going to tell you 3 short and unfortunately true stories about what people have had to endure because of their race, their color, and their religion. Now, the first story is about a Japanese American. The second story, about a German Jew. And this third story is about me. Now, in March of 1942, roughly 3 months after the bombing of Pearl Harbor, President Roosevelt signed Executive Order 9066, which ordered the forced evacuation of more than 120,000 Japanese and Japanese Americans from the West Coast. Though the majority of these people were American citizens, they were forced to leave behind their possessions and move first to hastily constructed camps at places like Santa Anita Racetrack in Los Angeles, where they lived behind barbed wire fences, guarded by dogs and armed sentries. One of those Japanese Americans sent to these internment camps, yes, internment camps right here in the United States, was George Takai, better known, sorry about that, George Takai, better known for his role as Sulu on the Star Trek series and movies. Takai remembers being forced to board a bus and leave his child at home and watching as his neighbors waited around to loot their belongings. His father told him they were going on a long vacation to an exotic place called Arkansas. Takai told an interview that initially the story sounded exotic to him. But when he and his family were put on a train with other Japanese Americans, it was a grueling, long trip. Takai said that once his family got to the internment camp, he got used to the way of life there. He told the interviewer he remembered the barbed wire fence that they were told never to go near. And he remembered the sentry towers with the machine guns on top. And he remembered the searchlight that followed him every night when he ran from his barracks to the latrine. He went on to say that children are amazingly adaptable. After a while, Takai said that living behind a barbed wire fence, constantly watched by armed guards, all became normal for him. Takai said he feels it's important to continue to remind not only Japanese Americans, but all Americans of what happened here during World War II in the United States. A time when, to quote Mr. Takai, the government assumed just because people were of Japanese ancestry, there's an inborn loyalty to the Emperor of Japan. Now, the second story is about Anne Frank, and most of you know that story. You know that she was one of over 1 million Jewish children that died during the Holocaust. Anne was born on June 12, 1929, in Frankfurt, Germany. The Frank family was forced to flee Germany to Amsterdam in 1933, the year the Nazis took control. By the beginning of 1940, they were trapped in Amsterdam because by then the Nazis had also occupied the Netherlands. Over the next 2 years, Jews endured untold atrocities and persecution. And eventually, by July of 1942, the family was forced into hiding in the hidden rooms of Anne's father's business. After 2 years in hiding, the family was betrayed, arrested, and sent to concentration camps. Eventually, Anne and her sister ended up at the Bergen-Belsen concentration camp, where they both died in March 1945, just a few weeks before the camp was liberated by British troops. While in hiding, Anne kept a diary in which she recorded her fears, her hopes, and her experiences. Found in the secret apartment after the family was arrested, the diary was kept by Anne by one of the people who tried to help the Frank family. It was published after the war in many languages and is used today in thousands of schools, both middle and high schools, across the United States, Europe, and in Asia. Anne Frank has become a symbol for the lost promise of children who died in the Holocaust. Now, the third story is about me, and it takes place in the spring of 1958. One day, my father and I walked about a mile to catch the bus so he could take me to the doctor. When we boarded the bus at the end of the line, it was empty except for the driver. My father got on the bus and he sat directly behind the driver. I looked at him in a state of confusion because it's just a few months earlier when we lived in Houston, Texas, we always sat at the back of the bus. And like George Takei, I thought that was normal. After all, in Houston, we had separate water fountains, one for whites, the other for colors. We had 2 waiting rooms at the doctor's office, one for whites and one for colors. I asked my father, why didn't we have to sit at the back of the bus? And without missing a beat, he told me that in Los Angeles, things were different. And to a certain extent, he was right. There were no longer separate waiting rooms. There were no longer separate water fountains. And we no longer had to sit at the back of the bus. However, by Sunday, September 15, 1963, the day 4 Negro children were killed while attending Sunday school at the 16th Street Baptist Church in Birmingham, Alabama, innocent victims of racially motivated hate crime, our block in Los Angeles, which had been integrated in 1958, was all Negro. At the same time, halfway across the country, in Louisiana, my wife Cynthia could go to the movie theater, but she was forced to sit in the balcony because of the color of her skin. Now, many people believe that the late 1950s and 60s were the height of the civil rights movement in this country. Now, most of you have heard these words that Dr. King spoke in Washington, D.C. in the summer of 1963. We also know that within less than 5 years, Dr. King was assassinated. However, as people of God, we know you can kill the messenger like they killed Jesus and like they killed John the Baptist, but you can't kill the message. There are some who say that with the election of President Barack Obama, Dr. King's dream has been achieved. We now have comfortable Black Americans like Oprah Winfrey, Robert Johnson, Bill Cosby, Denzel Washington, and the legion of millionaire Black athletes and entertainers, not to mention the business people and professionals who grabbed a big slice of the American pie. President Obama is not just a symbolic embodiment of the civil rights struggle, but of the still unfinished business of the civil rights movement. But I say that with one caveat and a risk. The caveat is that the civil rights challenges that Dr. King faced and that he so eloquently spoke of in his I Have a Dream speech almost 50 years ago are even more complex today. The risk is the great temptation to see the election of President Obama as the end, not the continuation of the civil rights battle. The checklist of problems that Dr. King faced and that we President Obama now pays includes astronomically high unemployment among young blacks and Latinos, gaping racial disparities in the criminal justice system, resegregation of neighborhoods and schools, rampant housing discrimination, racial and gender glass ceilings in corporate hiring and promotions, family instability among the poor, police abuse, racial profiling, as well as racially and religiously motivated hate crimes. Today, there are challenges that Dr. King didn't have to deal with, or were barely issues a half a century ago. One of those is the race problems in America are no longer exclusively black and white. That's because blacks are no longer America's largest minority. Latinos are. Immigration reform, the English-only wars, and the fight for political empowerment are the new civil rights concerns. I stand before you today with the knowledge that Dr. King's dream has not been achieved, but I still have hope. Every day that I walk in this building at FUMC, I see the possibility that Dr. King's dream may be reached one day. When I see and hear the works of United Methodist Women with the Poor and Disenfranchised, I have hope. When I see this church's congregation and youth group and their diversity, I have hope. During the Christmas cantata, when a parishioner took ill and a rainbow of people from this congregation went to his aid, it made me have hope. When that man right there Brad Hardesty, a white man from South Stanford, better known as Louisiana, tells Cynthia, a woman who at one time was restricted to the balcony when she went to the movies, he's making a trip home and asks if he can bring her anything. I have hope. In observing communion, we are remembering Christ and all that he has done for us in his life, death, and resurrection. At the same time, we are rekindling our hope and desire for a more Christ-like life. In celebrating the Martin Luther King Jr. holiday, we are not only remembering the works of Dr. King, but in addition, we are remembering the unsung heroes of the civil rights movement of yesterday and today. We are remembering people like Cynthia's uncle, Clarence Knighton, who risked his own life to give shelter to civil rights organizers in Louisiana in the 60s. The ordinary people, black, white, Hispanic, and Asian, who marched with Dr. King. People like Bob Crimmins, an American-born Irishman who took the time to pick up our daughter when she was stranded at the bus stop when she was about 10 years old. And our men and women in the military of every race, religion, color, and national origin, who risked their lives to protect our freedom. It's been almost 44 years since Dr. King's assassination, and there are people who do not have any personal recollection of what America was like during those turbulent times. So just as we take communion to remind us that Christ died on the cross for our sins, just as Jews celebrate Passover to commemorate the story of the Exodus, in which the ancient Israelites were freed from slavery in Egypt, and just as George Takei and others tell the story of the internment of Japanese Americans during World War II, we need to tell the story of Dr. King to remind us all how far we have come, and yes, how far we have to go before everyone is judged by the content of his or her character and not by the color of their skin. Thank you very much.
Amen.